This happened to me when I was 14, or rather, should I say, this happened to us. If you were to ask how many times my cousin's parents bounced from house to house, he would just shrug his shoulders. That's how often his parents would move. Sometimes it would be houses, sometimes even apartments. I do miss the times when he did live in apartments, as whenever we would play hide and seek with our other closest cousin, it would definitely be more exciting than just playing with some random kids from the apartment complex. Anyways, that's not important to the story. His parents were always a little bit weird, always constantly moving and leaving for business trips. That's how they could afford to move from place to place, and if you were to ask me what his parents did for a living, I literally have no idea because I barely talked to them. And if I ever did, it was at parties they threw, but you know how that goes. The only thing I know is that his dad is a contractor. That's literally about all. I remember this day like the back of my hand. It was hot as hell that day, almost like 100 degrees. It felt more like 110, but it wasn't nothing too bad. I used to always have sleepovers at his house whenever I could get the chance, and this day was no different, or so I thought. I arrived at his house in the early hours of the afternoon, and as expected, his parents were away on a business trip. We opened some of the windows so we could let the hot air out. Granted, this probably didn't help our case at all and most likely made it worse. We turned on each fan to max blast and went upstairs to play video games on his Xbox. We played for about an hour or two, and eventually we both got hungry. We agreed to go to this spot that was a 10-minute drive from his house. We got dressed, and before we left, we closed some of the windows. That way, if anybody were to drive or walk by, they wouldn't just hop through the window. The irony while writing this still hits me like a brick to this day. We got in my car and drove to the spot we agreed to get food at. I say my car because my mother trusted me enough to let me drive one of her spare cars. As bad as that sounds, she trusted me enough on the road by myself. She knows I would never jeopardize my life or even remotely drive recklessly. We ordered our food and quickly headed back home to avoid traffic. When we got home, we sat in the living room and watched YouTube or whatnot while we ate our food. We sat there for about a good hour or two before we headed back upstairs to his room. And around 7 or 8, we closed each window as it was getting dark out. I'll cut out the small details as you can use your imagination about what teenagers our age would do. I got thirsty and decided to go downstairs to get me a cup of water before I decided to go to bed. It was around 10 at this point and I was getting tired. So quickly, I filled up my cup and headed back upstairs. My cousin was already in bed scrolling through social media and whatnot. Shortly after, he rolled on his side and fell asleep. I couldn't fall asleep because of how incredibly hot it was, but after 10 minutes of rolling around and flipping the pillow around, eventually I fell asleep. I woke up sometime later. I checked my phone and it was 1 in the morning. I'm not sure what woke me up, but something woke me up. I rubbed my eyes and took a sip of water. Now that I was aware and awake, I heard it. Footsteps moving around downstairs. At first, I chalked it up as his parents coming back early from the business trip, but the footsteps kept pacing between one place. I heard drawers being opened and rummaged with, footsteps going between the living room and guest bedroom downstairs. I walked over to my cousin and shook him awake. He groggily said, "What?" I asked him, "Are your parents supposed to be home?" His head snapped to look at me and said, "No, they're not supposed to be back until Tuesday." This made my heart skip a beat. I quickly tiptoed to the door and locked it. Just as I was about to walk away from the door, I heard it. Footsteps coming slowly up the stairs as if they were trying to be quiet. I know my cousin heard it too because as soon as I turned my head to look in his direction, he was already quietly running to the window to unlock it. We were trying to lift it up, but the piece of shit was so old it wouldn't budge. We were grunting as quietly as we could, but it wasn't quite enough. We heard the doorknob trying to be turned, but obviously it was locked. I think this angered the person on the other side because when he saw the door didn't budge, he started kicking and ramming into it. Now the clock was ticking. Adrenaline kicked in and we finally got the window to open. I yelled at my cousin, "Anthony, go!" And he leaped down into the grass. Now it was my turn. I peeked my head over the edge and saw the fall. It had to be about 10 to 20 feet. Suddenly, I heard the door being busted open. I didn't think twice and just threw myself out the window. I landed on my right arm and backside. I looked up and saw a man with long, messy hair and his eyes wide looking right at me. I quickly got up and we bolted to the neighbor's house where we used their phone to call 911. Police showed up minutes later and investigated the house. They searched every room and every hiding space there could be, but he was nowhere to be found. He was already long gone. Later, I found out from paramedics I had sprained my collarbone and bicep. Luckily, nothing too serious. After that, the police took information regarding what happened and took a description of him. They said they would contact us if anything ever came up, but we never got a call back. I didn't tell my mom about the incident in fear of never getting to sleep over at his house ever again, and told her that I fell from a very high rock and landed on my side. She took me to a doctor because I complained about pain in my shoulder. That's how I found out. Me and my cousin both assumed that when we left to go get food or whenever we went upstairs and before we closed the windows, the man simply just climbed through and hid in the basement, waiting until we fell asleep to rob us, or maybe even worse. We rarely even talk anymore, but whenever we bring it up, we both laugh at it. I don't think the man was ever caught. I just hope he doesn't do anything bad to anyone else like he could have done to us.